On the morning of May 10, 2013, a morning jogger in Changzhou paused by a park lake, captivated by a strange splash of crimson floating on the surface. It was not discarded clothing. It was a young woman in a red dress, her hair fanned out in the dark water. What appeared to be a tragic drowning in shallow water would soon peel back to reveal a chilling conspiracy of greed and betrayal. Before we unravel this dark investigation, please consider subscribing to support the channel. The city of Changzhou, located in the prosperous Jiangsu province, is a bustling hub of industry and electronics manufacturing. But on the outskirts of the busy factories, the residential parks usually offer a quiet sanctuary for the locals. It was 6 a.m. on May 10, 2013. The air was cool and humid, typical for late spring in eastern China. An elderly man named Mr. Liang was beginning his daily routine, jogging along the paved paths of a park near the electronics industrial zone. Mr. Liang was a creature of habit. After completing a few laps, he slowed his pace, walking toward the edge of the artificial lake to catch his breath and admire the scenery. The lake was known for its clarity. The park maintenance crew was diligent. They swept the grounds daily, ensuring that the water remained free of the industrial refuse that plagued other parts of the city. Usually, the only things floating on the glassy surface were fallen leaves or the occasional twig. But today was different. As Mr. Liang gazed out over the water, his eyes locked onto an anomaly. About 10 to 15 feet from the bank, a bright red object was bobbing gently in the ripples. At first glance, it looked like a piece of fabric, perhaps a coat or a dress that someone had carelessly tossed into the water. Irritated by the litter, Mr. Liang stepped closer to the water's edge, intending to find a long branch to fish it out and throw it in the trash. As he squinted against the morning light, the object drifted slightly, rotating in the current. Mr. Liang froze. Above the red fabric, he saw a mass of long, black hair spreading out like ink in the water. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was not a pile of laundry. It was a human being. Panic surged through the elderly man. His face went pale, and his limbs began to tremble uncontrollably. He stumbled back from the shoreline, gasping for air, before finding his voice. He screamed for help, his cries shattering the morning silence. Other early risers and parkgoers, alerted by the terror in his voice, rushed to the scene. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. They stood on the banks, whispering in hushed, fearful tones, staring at the macabre sight. The body was floating face down. The face was submerged, invisible to the onlookers, but the back of the victim's head and the bright red dress were clearly visible, breaking the surface. Aquatic plants and reeds had tangled around the limbs, partially obscuring the form. To a casual observer walking quickly past, it might have looked like a mannequin or a pile of rags, but the stillness of the body was unmistakable to those standing watch. One of the bystanders pulled out a cell phone and dialed the police. 15 minutes later, the wail of sirens announced the arrival of the Changzhou Public Security Bureau. Officers spilled out of the cruisers, immediately establishing a cordon to push back the growing crowd of onlookers. Crime scene tape was strung up between the trees, isolating the lakeside. The investigators assessed the situation. The lake was an artificial body of water designed for aesthetics, not recreation. It was relatively small, and the bottom was uniform. The police knew this park well. The water was not dangerous. At its deepest point, the lake was only about 4.5 feet deep. It was shallow enough that an average adult could stand up with their head well above the surface. This fact alone made the scene peculiar. How does an adult drown in waist-deep water? The officers did not need heavy machinery or boats to retrieve the body. 3 officers waded into the cold water, the mud sucking at their boots. They moved respectfully but efficiently, reaching the body and carefully guiding it toward the grassy bank. Other officers remained in the water, wading in grid patterns, their hands sweeping through the silt and weeds. searching for any evidence, a weapon, a shoe, a phone that might have sunk to the bottom. As the body was pulled onto the dry grass, a collective gasp of pity went through the crowd. The victim was a woman, very young, likely in her early 20s. The forensic examiner began a preliminary assessment right there on the grass. The body was swollen, a sign of significant immersion. She had likely been in the water for several hours. Her fingernails were painted a vibrant red to match her dress, but the water had softened the lacquer, causing it to peel away in jagged flakes. She was wearing simple sandals. One was still strapped to her foot, but the other had come loose during the retrieval and fell onto the mud as they moved her. Her mouth and throat were clogged with silt, algae, and dry leaves, suggesting she had inhaled deeply while submerged, a classic, albeit gruesome, sign of drowning. Her long black hair was matted over her face like a veil. A detective reached down with a gloved hand and gently brushed the wet strands aside to reveal her features. She was a beautiful young woman, though her face was pale and distorted by death. She stood about 5 feet 3 inches tall. The investigators conducted a quick visual sweep for trauma. There were no stab wounds, no gunshot holes, and no obvious ligature marks on her neck. Her red dress was intact, not torn or disarrayed in a way that suggested a violent struggle. Furthermore, she was still wearing jewelry. A necklace glinted around her throat, and other pieces of value remained on her body. This immediately lowered the probability of a robbery homicide. If this had been a mugging gone wrong, the perpetrator would almost certainly have stripped her of her valuables. The forensic doctor noted another detail. Around the victim's nose and mouth, there was a presence of bloody foam. In forensic pathology, this is often associated with pulmonary edema caused by drowning. It suggested she was alive when she entered the water. Based on the state of the body and the water temperature, the medical examiner estimated the time of death to be late the previous night, around May 9th. But the central mystery remained: the depth of the water. The victim was 5 feet 3 inches tall. The water was barely 4.5 feet deep. Even if she couldn't swim, all she had to do was stand up. Unless she had been unconscious before she hit the water, or perhaps held down, drowning seemed physically impossible in such conditions. To solve this riddle, the police first needed a name. They searched the pockets of her dress, but they came up empty. No wallet, no identification card, no cell phone. She was a Jane Doe. The investigators turned their attention back to the lake. If she hadn't walked into the water, how did she get there? The officers in the water continued their search, using long nets and poles to scour the lake bed near where the body was found. After an hour of dredging the murky bottom, they hit something solid. It was metallic. With some effort, they hauled the object to the surface. It was an electric bicycle, a common mode of transport in Chinese cities. The bike looked relatively new. There was no rust on the frame, and the paint was bright, suggesting it had not been underwater for long. It had likely entered the water around the same time as the woman. The discovery of the e-bike strengthened the theory that the victim was local. No one would ride an e-bike into a lake and just leave it there, unless a catastrophe had occurred. The police expanded their search radius. They combed through the nearby bushes, checked the stone benches, inspected the public restrooms, and even rummaged through the park's trash cans, looking for a discarded purse or ID. Nothing. They checked the surveillance cameras. The park had a security system, but it was woefully inadequate. There were no cameras pointing directly at the lake. The officers rushed to the residential compound across the street, hoping the security guards there might have footage. The footage was a dead end. The residential cameras only covered the entrance to the compound. While one camera in the guard booth was angled toward the park, it was too far away, and the angle was too oblique. The footage was grainy and dark. It was impossible to distinguish any faces or specific movements from the night before. The investigation was stalling before it had even truly begun. They had a body, a bike, and a suspicious location, but no identity. The police decided to release a public notice. They broadcasted a description of the woman, her age, her height, the red dress, and the e-bike, hoping that a family member would recognize the description and come forward. Hours ticked by. The sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt of the industrial zone. The pressure was mounting. In the heat, the biological evidence on the body would degrade quickly. They needed an ID, and they needed it fast. Around noon, just as the detectives were preparing for another sweep of the lake, a call came into the station. The caller was a man named Li Liang. His voice was trembling. He told the dispatcher that his wife had gone out the previous night and had never returned home. The police immediately perked up. They asked Li Liang for a description of his wife. He described a woman in her mid-20s with long black hair. When asked what she was wearing, he hesitated before saying she often wore a red dress. It was a match. The police asked Li Liang to come to the crime scene immediately to identify the body. When the police cruiser arrived at the park with Li Liang in the back seat, the man looked like a ghost. He stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady. As he looked toward the spot where the body lay covered by a sheet, his face drained of color. He lingered by the police tape, paralyzed by fear and denial. It was the reaction of a man who was terrified that his worst nightmare was about to be confirmed. A detective approached him, speaking softly. "Mr. Li, we need you to be strong. We need you to take a look." Li Liang took a deep breath, fighting back tears, and walked toward the body. As he got closer, his composure cracked. He saw the hem of the red dress peeking out from under the sheet. He saw the familiar sandal. When the officer pulled back the sheet to reveal the face, Li Liang collapsed. He fell to his knees in the dirt, wailing, "It's her! It's my wife!" He began to sob uncontrollably, his hands gripping the grass. "It's all my fault," he screamed, his voice raw with agony. "It is all my fault. I bought her that electric bike. I told her to go practice riding it so she could be independent. If I hadn't bought that car, if I hadn't let her go out alone, this never would have happened." He pounded his chest, berating himself. "I killed her. I killed her by letting her go." The onlookers, and even some of the hardened police officers, were moved by the display. It was a heart-wrenching scene of a husband shattered by sudden grief. The detectives helped him up, offering words of condolence, assuring him that it was an accident, not his fault. Once Li Liang had calmed down enough to speak, the police began the formal interview. He identified the victim as Liao Hongxia, 26 years old. The tragedy was compounded by the fact that they were practically newlyweds. Li Liang and Liao Hongxia had only been married for 2 months. They were still in their honeymoon phase. Li Liang explained his background. He was a divorcee. After his first marriage failed, he had met Liao Hongxia. She was kind, gentle, and capable everything he had been looking for. They fell in love quickly. He had proposed, she had accepted, and they had started their life together with high hopes. And now, less than 60 days later, she was gone. The police asked the standard question, "Why didn't you report her missing sooner? It has been over 12 hours. Li Liang wiped his eyes. I thought you had to wait 24 hours to file a missing person report. I didn't want to bother the police if she had just stayed at a friend's house, but I was worried. I drove around all night looking for her." He explained the timeline. "Last night, around 9 p.m., I came home. Her younger brother told me she had gone out to practice riding the new e-bike. She wasn't very good at it yet. Her balance was poor. I called her, but she didn't answer. I thought maybe she was focusing on the road. I waited, and when she didn't come back, I went out to find her. But I couldn't find her anywhere." He looked at the lake, his eyes red. "That bike, it's hard to control. The throttle is sensitive. She must have lost control. She must have swerved and gone right into the water." The police looked at the evidence. The e-bike found in the lake matched Li Liang's description perfectly. The tire tracks near the bank, though faint, could be consistent with a bike veering off the path. The puzzle pieces seemed to fit. A novice rider on a powerful electric bike, riding at night on a poorly lit path. She loses control, panics, throttles too hard, and shoots into the lake. The impact with the water disorients her, or perhaps she hits her head on the handlebars or a rock on the way down, rendering her unable to stand up in the shallow water. She inhales water and drowns in the dark, just a few feet from safety. It was a tragic, freak accident. The police coroner completed the examination. Cause of death: drowning. Manner of death: accidental. There were no signs of foul play, no sexual assault, and no robbery. The case seemed open and shut. The authorities prepared the death certificate. Li Liang, the grieving widower, accepted the conclusion with resignation. He looked like a broken man, forced to accept that his new bride had been taken by a cruel twist of fate. But the story did not end there. Liao Hongxia's parents lived far away in Sichuan province. When they received the phone call that their daughter was dead, they were devastated. They immediately rented a car and drove the hundreds of miles to Jiangsu province, arriving later that same day. When they saw their daughter's body, their grief turned instantly to rage. They refused to accept the police's conclusion. "My daughter is not clumsy," her father argued, his voice shaking with anger. "And she isn't stupid. How does a grown woman drown in a puddle? This makes no sense." They demanded justice. They demanded a reinvestigation. They accused the police of being lazy, of wanting to close the case too quickly. At the police station, a divide began to form. Most officers wanted to close the file. The evidence for an accident was strong, and the husband's grief seemed genuine. But a few detectives felt a nagging doubt. The parents' insistence struck a chord, and there was the lingering physics of the drowning, a 5'3" woman in 4.5-foot water. One detective stood up in the briefing room. "The family is right," he said. "It's too clean. We have a dead bride, a grieving husband, and a story that fits a little too perfectly. We need to look again." To avoid a miscarriage of justice, the Major Crimes Unit decided to suspend the initial ruling. They would not declare it an accident just yet. They were going back to the lake. The decision to reopen the investigation was not made lightly. In the Chinese judicial system, overturning an initial finding of accidental death requires substantial cause, as it implies a failure in the preliminary police work. However, the detectives of the Chengzhou Public Security Bureau could not ignore the glaring inconsistencies pointed out by Liao Hongxia's parents. The physics of the drowning simply did not add up. The investigators returned to the drawing board, treating the case as a homicide until proven otherwise. They began by meticulously reconstructing the timeline and the geography of that fatal night. The first anomaly that struck the senior detective was the distance. Li Liang and Liao Hongxia lived in an apartment that was roughly 19 miles away from the park where her body was found. For an American audience, driving 19 miles might seem like a standard commute, but in a dense Chinese city, on an electric scooter with a limited battery range and a top speed of perhaps 20 miles per hour, this was a significant journey. Why would a woman who was supposedly a novice rider, someone so uncomfortable on the bike that she needed to practice, ride nearly 20 miles across the city at night just to do laps in a park near an industrial zone? It made no logical sense. If she wanted to practice her balance, she would have gone to a nearby empty parking lot or a quiet street in her own neighborhood. The fact that she ended up 19 miles away suggested she had a specific destination in mind. She was not wandering, she was commuting. Then there was the issue of the water. The forensic team went back to the lake with measuring tape. They confirmed the depth at the point of recovery was exactly 4 feet and 7 inches. Liao Hongxia stood 5 feet 3 inches tall. In a drowning scenario, panic is the killer. A person who cannot swim will thrash and gasp. But in water that shallow, all she had to do was extend her legs and stand up. Her head would have been a full 8 inches above the surface. For a healthy adult to drown in waist-deep water without any head trauma, without being knocked unconscious, and without any drugs or alcohol in her system, which the toxicology report confirmed, was nearly impossible unless someone held her down. These two facts, the inexplicable distance and the impossible depth shifted the atmosphere in the precinct. The detective's eyes turned toward the grieving husband, Li Liang. In homicide investigations, the spouse is always the first suspect, but Li Liang had been remarkably cooperative. Too cooperative, perhaps. When the police suggested they needed to search for more evidence at the lake, specifically Liao Hongxia's missing cell phone, Li Liang did not wait for them. He took the initiative. He told the police that he did not trust their initial search, accusing them of being thorough enough. He hired a private salvage team, paying them out of his own pocket to dredge the lake area where his wife was found. Li Liang's dedication seemed like the actions of a heartbroken man desperate for a connection to his lost wife. And, sure enough, his team found it. They recovered Liao Hongxia's smartphone from the mud. Li Liang handed the phone over to the police immediately. It was waterlogged and dead, having been submerged for days. "I just wanted to find it," he told them, tears in his eyes. "I didn't want to leave any part of her behind in that cold water." At the time, the officers viewed this as an act of love. Now, viewing him through the lens of a suspect, it looked like damage control. Had he hired the team to find the phone to ensure the police got it? Or had he hoped to find it first, to delete something? By handing it over, he controlled the narrative, presenting himself as the helpful, grieving widower rather than a suspect hiding evidence. The police sent the device to the cyber forensics lab. The water damage was severe, but digital forensics had advanced significantly. The technicians began the slow process of cleaning the corrosion, drying the components, and attempting to bypass the shorted circuits to access the flash memory. While the technicians worked, the detectives dug into Li Liang's background. They visited the apartment he had shared with Liao Hongxia. It was a modest home, but they discovered they were not living alone. Li Liang and his wife shared the space with a third person, Liao Hongxia's younger half-brother. The brother was a university student. To save money on dormitory fees and food, the couple had allowed him to move in with them. It was a kind gesture, typical of a close-knit family. The detective sat the young man down for an interview, hoping to get a window into the couple's private life. They seemed happy, the brother told the police. They were newlyweds. Sure, they bickered sometimes, like any couple, but nothing violent, nothing serious. He explained the daily routine. He went to classes during the day, and the couple went to work. They would usually meet for dinner, and then he would retreat to his room to study, giving the newlyweds their privacy. He insisted he had seen no red flags. However, as the interview progressed, the brother mentioned another detail about the living arrangements. "It wasn't just the three of us until recently," he said. "A friend of Li Liang's was living here too." The detectives perked up. "A friend?" "Yes," the brother replied. "A man named Zhu Jue. He was Li Liang's best friend. He stayed with us for a while, sleeping on the couch or in the spare space. But he moved out about 10 days before my sister died." "Why did he move out?" the detective asked. "He said he didn't want to intrude anymore," the brother shrugged. "He felt like a third wheel. After he left, I never saw him again." The police noted the name, Zhu Jue. It was a lead, but at the moment, it seemed peripheral. Their focus remained on Li Liang. They obtained a warrant to look into Li Liang's finances, and what they found was the smoking gun they had been looking for. Among the stack of documents in the apartment, tucked away in a file, was a life insurance policy. The policy had been purchased just 1 month and a half after Li Liang and Liao Hongxia signed their marriage certificate. It was a massive policy. The payout for accidental death was listed at 4.5 million renminbi. In 2013, 4.5 million renminbi was approximately $730,000 US. In a country where the average annual salary for a private sector employee was less than $8,000, this was a fortune. It was generational wealth, and the sole beneficiary was Li Liang. The detectives stared at the document. It was a classic, almost cliché motive. The timing was suspicious, the amount was astronomical, and the beneficiary was the husband who had been crying at the lake. Furthermore, the type of insurance was specific. It was a high-risk accident policy, usually purchased by people with dangerous jobs, construction workers, miners, or stuntmen. Liao Hongxia worked a safe, boring desk job. There was absolutely no reason for her to have this level of coverage unless someone was betting on her dying in a violent accident. The police brought Li Liang back in for questioning. This time, the tone was not one of condolence. They slammed the insurance policy onto the metal table. "Explain this," the lead investigator demanded. "Why does a 26-year-old office worker need $750,000 in accidental death insurance?" Li Liang didn't flinch. He had an answer ready. "I bought it out of guilt," he said smoothly. "I had purchased a similar policy for my ex-wife years ago. When I married Hongxia, I didn't want her to feel like she was second best, or that I cared for her less. I wanted her to have the same security. I bought it to prove my love, to show her she was equal." It was a plausible excuse, but the detectives weren't buying it. They dug deeper into his financial health. The audit revealed that Li Liang was drowning. He was not the successful provider he pretended to be. He was a heavy gambler with a long history of losing. He owed tens of thousands of dollars to various creditors and loan sharks. The pressure on him must have been immense. Yet, despite this crushing debt, the investigation showed that during his courtship of Liao Hongxia, he had spent money like water. He had bought her the latest iPhone, expensive jewelry, and designer clothes. He had presented himself as a wealthy, generous suitor. The police synthesized a theory. Li Liang was a con man. He was broke and in debt. He identified Liao Hongxia as a target, a naive, younger woman. He borrowed money to court her, creating a facade of wealth to lure her into marriage. Once the ring was on her finger, he took out a massive insurance policy, waited a few weeks for the paperwork to clear, and then staged an accident to cash out. He would pay off his gambling debts and live like a king on the remaining $500,000. It was a solid theory. It fit the profile of a sociopathic ladder climber. The police felt they were close to an arrest. They just needed that final piece of evidence to link him directly to the murder. Then, the technology lab called. They had managed to revive the phone. The motherboard was fried, but the memory chip was intact. They had extracted the call logs and text messages from the days leading up to the murder. The detectives huddled around the computer screen, scrolling through the data. They expected to find incriminating texts from Li Liang, perhaps luring her to the park. Instead, they found a mystery. The call log showed that on the night of her death and in the weeks prior, Liao Hongxia had been in frequent contact with a specific number. The number ended in 6716. It wasn't Li Liang's number. It wasn't her parents'. It wasn't her brother's. On the night she died, she had called this number multiple times. The detectives cross-referenced the number with her contacts list. It was unsaved, no name attached, just a raw sequence of digits. This was highly suspicious. Why would a newlywed woman be making secret calls to an unsaved number late at night? Was she having an affair? Or was this person the killer? The police questioned Li Liang about the number. "Who is this?" they asked, showing him the log. Li Liang stared at the number and shook his head. "I don't know. I've never seen it before. Maybe it's a client?" She worked in sales. She talked to a lot of people. The detectives were skeptical. They went back to the brother. "Do you recognize this number? 6716? The brother looked at it and frowned. "No, I don't know it." The investigation hit a sudden fork in the road. The police had been building a case against the husband based on the insurance money, but now they had a phantom caller. If Liao Hongxia went to the park to meet the person attached to that number, it might not be Li Liang she was meeting. The police subpoenaed the telecom company for the subscriber details of the number ending in 6716. When the name came back, the pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a deafening click. The number belonged to Zhu Zhuwei, the best friend, the man who had lived on their couch, the man who had moved out just 10 days before the murder. The detectives felt a jolt of adrenaline. They went back to Li Liang. "Your best friend Zhu Zhuwei, Why was your wife calling him?" Li Liang looked genuinely shocked. His face registered confusion, then betrayal. Zhu Juwei? That's his number? Why would she be calling him? They barely spoke to each other when he lived here. He seemed to crumble. Wait, are you saying? Were they having an affair? My best friend and my wife? Li Liang put his head in his hands. I trusted him. He was like a brother to me, and she, my wife. The police observed his reaction carefully. Was this genuine shock, or was it an Academy Award-winning performance? Regardless of Li Liang's reaction, Zhu Juwei was now the primary person of interest. The police needed to talk to him immediately. They tried calling the number. It went straight to voicemail. The phone was off. They went to the address listed on his registration. The apartment was empty. Neighbors said they hadn't seen him in days. Zhu Juwei was in the wind. The police issued an all-points bulletin. They contacted local precincts in the surrounding districts and circulated Zhu Juwei's photograph. He was now a fugitive. The investigation had transformed from a simple accident to a complex triangle of betrayal. Was this a crime of passion? Did the best friend and the wife have a secret romance that went wrong? Did she threaten to tell Li Liang and Zhu Juwei killed her to keep her quiet? Or was it something darker? For weeks, the police hunted. They tracked his credit card usage, his transit card, and his digital footprint. Finally, nearly a month after the murder, on June 13th, the net tightened. They tracked Zhu Juwei to a hideout in a neighboring city. A SWAT team moved in, surrounding the building. They arrested him without a fight. Zhu Juwei sat in the interrogation room, looking disheveled and exhausted after a month on the run. The detectives expected him to lawyer up, to deny everything, or to claim he was just a friend. But as soon as the camera started recording, Zhu Juwei did something unexpected. He began to weep. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry for Li Liang. He is my brother, my best friend. And poor Hongxia. I didn't mean for it to happen." The detectives exchanged glances. He wasn't denying it. "Tell us what happened," the lead investigator said, sliding a box of tissues across the table. Zhu Juwei took a breath and began to spin a tale of forbidden love and tragic accidents. He confessed that while living in the apartment, he and Liao Hongxia had developed feelings for each other. It started with glances, then whispers when Li Liang wasn't looking. "I felt guilty," Zhu Juwei said. "That's why I moved out 10 days before she died. I couldn't look Li Liang in the eye anymore. I tried to end it, but, according to Zhu, the attraction was too strong." On the night of May 9th, Liao Hongxia had called him. She wanted to see him. She begged him to meet her at the park near the industrial zone, a quiet, secluded place where they wouldn't be seen. "I missed her too much," Zhu admitted. "So I went. I took a taxi to the park." He described the scene vividly. They met by the lake. The passion was intense. They were intimate there in the darkness of the park. Afterwards, Zhu Juwei offered to give her a ride home on her electric bike, suggesting they could drop him off near a taxi stand on the way. "I was driving," Zhu said. "She was sitting behind me, holding my waist. We were riding along the path near the water. It was dark. I misjudged the turn." He claimed that he accidentally steered the bike off the paved path and into the lake. "We both fell in," he cried. "The water was cold. I panicked. I struggled to get out. The mud was slippery. I managed to climb up the bank, gasping for air. I looked back for Hongxia, but she wasn't moving. She was face down. I called her name, but she didn't answer." "Why didn't you help her?" the detective pressed. "The water is shallow. I was scared," Zhu wailed. "I'm a coward. I saw she wasn't moving, and I thought she was dead. I panicked. I thought about Li Liang, about the affair. I didn't want anyone to know, so I ran. I left her there and I ran away." The police quickly verified parts of his story. They found a taxi driver who confirmed he had picked up a soaking wet man near the park around 4 a.m. that night. The passenger had paid with wet cash. It seemed to fit, a sordid affair, a tragic accident caused by distracted driving or darkness, and a cowardly lover who fled the scene to save his own reputation. When the police relayed this confession to Li Liang, the husband went into a rage. He tried to lunge at the officers, screaming threats against his former best friend. "He slept with my wife and then left her to die," Li Liang roared, held back by two officers. "I'll kill him! I'll kill him myself!" It was a perfect narrative, a tragedy of Greek proportions. But there was one detective in the room who wasn't writing it down. He was staring at the transcript of Zhu Zhuwei's confession, frowning. He had caught a detail, a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail, that Zhu Zhuwei had mentioned about the bike ride. Zhu Zhuwei had said, "I turned off the headlights to keep us hidden in the dark so no one would see us." The detective looked at the photos of the crime scene. The path by the lake was pitch black at night. There were no streetlights. Who turns off their headlights while driving a motorized vehicle on a winding path next to a lake in total darkness? That wasn't an accident. That was a suicide mission, or a guided execution. The interrogation room was heavy with the scent of stale coffee and nervous sweat. Zhu Zhuwei sat hunched in the metal chair, his eyes darting between the mirror and the detective across the table. He had confessed to a crime of passion, a tragic accident born of an illicit affair. He had admitted to cowardice, to fleeing the scene while his lover drowned. It was a neat, pathetic story that wrapped up the case. But the lead investigator was not satisfied. He held the transcript of Zhu Zhuwei's confession in his hand, tapping a single sentence with his pen. "Let us go back to the moment before the crash," the detective said, his voice deceptively calm. "You said you turned off the headlights of the electric bike." Zhu Zhuwei nodded vigorously. "Yes. I told you, we were lovers. We were hiding. I didn't want anyone to see us together in the park, so I killed the lights to keep us invisible." The detective leaned forward, invading Zhu's personal space. "Zhu, have you ever ridden an e-bike on the lakeside path at night? There are no street lamps there. The tree canopy blocks out the moonlight. It is pitch black. Turning off your headlights on a winding path next to a body of water isn't romantic. It is suicidal. You wouldn't be able to see 3 feet in front of you." Zhu Zhuwei swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I just wanted privacy. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking perfectly clearly," the detective countered, slamming his hand on the table. "You didn't turn off the lights to hide from pedestrians. There were no pedestrians at 4 in the morning. You turned off the lights because you didn't want to see what you were about to do. Or perhaps you turned them off so she wouldn't see the water coming until it was too late." Zhu Zhuwei began to stammer, sweat beading on his forehead. The logic of his lie was crumbling. Driving blind into a lake was not a mistake. It was a maneuver. "This wasn't an accident, was it?" the detective pressed. "You didn't lose control. You drove into that water on purpose." Under the relentless pressure, the facade of the grieving lover cracked. Zhu Zhuwei put his head in his hands and let out a guttural sound, half sob, half laugh. When he looked up, his eyes were dead. "It wasn't my idea," Zhu whispered. The room went silent. "What did you say?" the detective asked. "I said it wasn't my idea," Zhu repeated, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "I didn't want to kill her. He made me do it. He told me exactly how to do it." "Who?" "Li Liang." Zhu spat the name out like a curse. "Her husband. My best friend. He planned everything. He hired me." The confession that followed painted a picture of depravity that shocked even the veteran officers. This was not a love triangle gone wrong. It was a cold-blooded, orchestrated contract killing, masterminded by the grieving husband who had wept so theatrically at the water's edge. Zhu Zhuwei revealed the terms of their devil's bargain. Li Liang had promised him 200,000 renminbi, roughly 32,000 United States dollars, to seduce and then murder Liao Hongxia. The plan was to stage it as an accident so Li Liang could collect on the massive insurance policy. The police moved immediately. They arrested Li Liang at his home. When the officers cuffed him, he played the part of the confused, innocent victim to perfection, "You are making a mistake," Li Liang shouted as he was dragged to the cruiser. "You are listening to a murderer. He killed my wife, and now he is trying to frame me to save his own skin." In the interrogation room, Li Liang maintained his innocence with an arrogant confidence. He claimed that Zhu Juwei was lying, that the police were incompetent for believing the ramblings of a desperate man. But the detectives were ready. They laid out the timeline. They showed him the text messages recovered from Zhu's phone-coded messages that, when viewed in light of the confession, clearly discussed the progress of the plan. They played the recording of Zhu Juwei detailing the specific instructions Li Liang had given him about the location of the lake and the depth of the water. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Li Liang's arrogance evaporated. His posture slumped, and the mask of the grieving widower fell away, revealing the cold, calculating narcissist underneath. He confessed. The full story of Li Liang's life was a testament to greed and moral bankruptcy. He was a man drowning in his own vices. He was a compulsive gambler, and his addiction had led him into a spiral of debt that he could not escape. He owed money to banks, to friends, and to dangerous loan sharks. This wasn't his first attempt to solve his financial problems with violence. He admitted that he had previously targeted his ex-wife. He had purchased insurance on her as well, intending to stage an accident. However, he had hesitated. They had 2 sons together, and a flicker of conscience, or perhaps fear of getting caught, had stayed his hand. Instead of killing her, he had subjected her to brutal domestic violence, beating her until she agreed to a divorce, allowing him to walk away and find a new, easier target. That target was Liao Hongxia. He had met her online, presenting himself as a successful, wealthy businessman. It was all a lie. The expensive gifts, the dinners, the iPhone. It was all funded by credit cards and loans he had no intention of repaying. It was an investment in a slaughter. Liao Hongxia, kind and trusting, had fallen for the charade. She thought she had found her Prince Charming, but almost immediately after the wedding, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. Once the marriage certificate was signed, Li Liang's behavior changed overnight. The doting lover became cold and distant. He stopped touching her. He became verbally abusive, picking fights over trivial matters. He was also openly hostile to her parents. Liao Hongxia soon discovered the truth about his finances. She realized he was not a wealthy executive, but a low-level employee earning a meager salary, with a mountain of gambling debt. She was trapped in a marriage with a liar. The tension in the household exploded when Liao Hongxia found the old insurance papers Li Liang had taken out on his ex-wife. She confronted him, terrified and confused. Why did he have such a high policy on his former spouse? Thinking quickly, Li Liang spun a lie. He told her it was just a standard procedure, a way to show care. To prove it, he promised to buy an even bigger policy for her. The next day, he came home with the accidental death policy worth 4.5 million renminbi. Liao Hongxia, naive to the depths of his malice, accepted this as a gesture of reassurance. In reality, she had just signed her own death warrant. Li Liang considered various ways to kill her. He thought about taking her on a hiking trip and pushing her off a cliff, but he was too broke to afford the travel costs. He needed a method that was cheap, local, and looked like an accident. A car accident seemed plausible, but Li Liang knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed an accomplice, someone he could control. He turned to his childhood friend, Zhu Juwei. Zhu was a man of weak character, also struggling with money. When Li Liang offered him $32,000 to help kill his wife, Zhu didn't run to the police. He negotiated. Together, they devised one of the most cruel and psychological schemes imaginable. Li Liang knew that simply murdering his wife might draw too much suspicion to himself. He needed to distance himself from the act. He came up with the honey trap. Li Liang invited Zhu Juwei to move into their small apartment under the guise of helping a friend in need. But the real purpose was sickening. Li Liang wanted Zhu to seduce his wife, He created a vacuum of affection. He treated Liao Hongxia with cold indifference, ignoring her emotional needs, making her feel unloved and lonely. Meanwhile, Zhu Jue played the role of the sympathetic listener. He was there to offer a shoulder to cry on, to pay her the compliments her husband refused to give. It worked. Vulnerable and isolated, Liao Hongxia fell into the trap. She began an affair with Zhu Jue, finding comfort in the arms of the man who had been hired to kill her. This affair was the perfect cover. It gave Zhu access to her. It gave them a reason to be alone together. And if they were caught, Li Liang could play the victim of infidelity. On the night of May 9th, the plan entered its final phase. Li Liang had bought the electric bike specifically for this moment. He knew the bike was powerful and difficult to handle for a beginner. He instructed Zhu to lure her out. Zhu called Liao Hongxia and asked her to meet him at the park for a secret rendezvous. Li Liang stayed home, establishing his alibi, waiting for the phone call that would make him a millionaire. At the park, after their intimate encounter, Zhu convinced Liao Hongxia to let him drive the bike while she sat on the back. As they approached the designated spot near the lake, Zhu cut the headlights. In the darkness, confused and trusting, Liao Hongxia likely held onto his waist tighter. Zhu Jue accelerated. He steered the bike off the path and plunged into the water. The crash was violent. They both hit the water, but as the detective suspected, the fall didn't kill her. The water was shallow. Liao Hongxia struggled to the surface, gasping, trying to stand up in the waist-deep water. She wasn't drowning. She was surviving. That was when Zhu Jue finished the job. He didn't run away in a panic as he had first claimed. He waded over to the woman who had just been intimate with him, the woman who trusted him, and he grabbed her. He forced her head under the water. Liao Hongxia fought for her life. She thrashed and kicked, her hands clawing at the water. But Zhu was stronger. He held her down in the dark, murky water until the bubbles stopped rising, until her body went limp. He then dragged her body slightly to ensure it looked like she had drifted. He left the bike submerged. He climbed out of the bank, shivering not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline of murder, and walked to the main road to hail a taxi. It was a cold, brutal execution. When the full truth was revealed in court, the public outrage was deafening. The image of the husband waiting at home while his best friend drowned, his wife, was too heinous to comprehend. Li Liang's defense attorney tried to argue that he was merely a desperate man caught in a bad situation, but the judge was unmoved. The premeditation was clear. The cruelty was absolute. On June 17, 2014, the Jiangsu Province Court delivered its verdict. For the crimes of intentional homicide and insurance fraud, Li Liang was sentenced to death. He was stripped of all political rights, and his personal assets were confiscated. The mastermind, who thought he could trade his wife's life for a gambling payout, would pay with his own life. Zhu Jiawei, the hands of the operation, was also found guilty of intentional homicide. However, because he had cooperated with the police, provided the crucial testimony that convicted Li Liang, and shown remorse, the court showed a sliver of leniency. He was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve. In the Chinese legal system, this usually means the sentence is commuted to life imprisonment if the prisoner demonstrates good behavior during the 2 years. He would likely spend the rest of his days behind bars, haunted by the memory of the woman he drowned. The case of Liao Hongxia is a terrifying reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a wedding ring. She was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, searching for love and stability. She thought she had found it in Li Liang, but she had merely walked into a slaughterhouse disguised as a home. She was betrayed by the 2 men closest to her. Her husband, who viewed her as a paycheck, and her lover, who viewed her as a job. In her final moments, struggling in the dark water, realizing that the man holding her down was the one she had trusted with her secrets. The horror she must have felt is unimaginable. This tragedy serves as a grim warning about the dangers of the unknown. Even within our own circles, we are taught to fear strangers in dark alleys, but often, the most dangerous people are the ones who sleep beside us. As the old saying goes, you may know a person's face, but you will never know their heart. Justice was served in Changzhou, but it came too late for the lady in the red dress. Thank you for joining us for this investigation. If you found this case compelling, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories from around the world. What do you think about the sentence? Did Zhu Juwei deserve the death penalty without reprieve for his role, or was he just a pawn in Li Liang's game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.